Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, in part two of our continued coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war, I wanted to cover some information that was being put out by the mass media that I felt that, at least from a military aspect, I should indeed address what is being said. So, if you look at some of the news programs that are being aired today, it would appear that both sides are trying to set up safety corridors where civilians can leave a variety of areas, of combat areas throughout the country. And we're hearing reports that the Russians are requiring that some of the fleeing civilians retreat through their lines, their checkpoints. And the reason behind that is probably to identify fighting age males that may be trying to leave the actual combat zone, which could have been actual fighters leaving a certain area. Now, that occurs within the confines of war, and obviously the Ukrainians would like their forces to, or not their forces, their civilians, to be able to peaceably leave cities such as Kharkov and other areas without going through Russian lines, and that is obviously very reasonable as well. Now, what is also being said is that minefields are being deployed along the civilian routes of escape from some of these cities. And right off the bat, the media is alleging that the Russians are deploying these minefields. And again, most people, when they think of a minefield, they think of an individual soldier and or group of soldiers going out and basically planting mines in a field or next to roads, or in some cases just laying them on the roadways. That obviously does occur, and soldiers do lay minefields at times. But the easiest way to deploy mines is through artillery delivery system. So what happens is you load your artillery gun up with a we call them fast cams in the U.S. military, and you fire your artillery round, which inside of this shell contains scatterable mines. And both the Russians and the U.S. military use these for both defensive and offensive operations. So if you have in case we'll for instance look at this Ukrainian attack or a Russian attack along these routes of advance. So if it were the Russians that had gotten wind of a Ukrainian attack, they're probably going to deploy some of these fast cams. They'll fire off artillery in the general vicinity in front of these advancing formations of Ukrainian armor. With that being said, the Ukrainians are also going to fire off their own versions of the fast cam or deployable mine systems because the Ukrainians use a lot of the same equipment that the Russians do. They have the same deployable minefields that they would use in these artillery systems to launch these artillery downrange. These are most likely 152 millimeter artillery rounds that have these smaller scatterable mines that are then deployed by these artillery systems. So it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of the Russians deploying minefields in possible routes of advance that they may end up using to enter Kiev at some point, or some other city that they're looking to envelop. So I think what they're alleging, so say back over here in Kharkov, that some of these main arterial routes out of the city, such as the 105, we could have seen the deployment of mines within the vicinity of some of these routes that the civilians would escape the city from. Now, I would say it's probably more likely that the Ukrainians, in a defensive posture, probably laid that minefield, anticipating that Kharkov would be enveloped, and these would be at some points would be the access routes that the Russian army would take into the city. So again, put yourself in the Russian position. Why would the Russians lay a minefield in the possible route of advance into a city that they're trying to take? It's possible. Again, the Russians could have identified at some point a Ukrainian military unit that was trying to make egress out of, trying to escape from Kharkov, and they decided to deploy basically an instant minefield in front of some of those vehicle formations that were trying to escape the city, slow down those vehicles, and then at a later time, while they're trying to clear that minefield, the Russian Air Force could come in and quite possibly bomb that column. So very difficult to say who laid the minefield where, because I would wager that both sides are using scatterable mines in this conflict, meaning they're firing off artillery rounds that contain these minefields. It seems more reasonable that because the Ukrainians are on the defensive a lot in this conflict and fighting inside and around the cities, they are indeed using some of these scatterable artillery mines and putting those in front of Russian positions within the entire confines of the battlefield. So again, when you hear there's a minefield in front of a civilian escape route, for whatever reason, well, I think I know the reason, the Western media is automatically assuming that the Russians laid the minefield, and you cannot assume that. It could have been both parties, and again, these are not human beings in all likelihood that are going out and laying mines. If it was human beings, physical soldiers going out and laying mines, I would wager in all probability it was the Ukrainians, because then they're providing an active defense towards their city. The Russians are going to deploy the mines with those fast cams or those artillery scatterable mines to put up instant blocking formations if a Ukrainian unit is trying to maneuver. But ordinarily, the Russians are not going to be using mines in a defensive posture, because the Russians are on the attack for the most part, not the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are attacking, and you can't rule out that possibility as well. But again, just to say that the Russians are deploying these minefields in front of the escape routes of civilians is nonsensical. I mean, think about it. Do you really believe that a Russian commander got on his talk and said, hey, Colonel so-and-so, or hey, Captain so-and-so, we have civilians leaving this city, so we want to put a minefield in front of them? I don't care who you are. You're going to get some negative feedback if the line formations find out that the intent of your military is to put minefields in front of a civilian retreat route or an escape route. Now, if it's used to for an active defensive role, or to deploy those scatterable mines in front of an opposing force, yeah, then absolutely they're going to do that. But again, I just don't believe, and I don't think neither side would intentionally do that. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of the collateral damage is again, yeah, it's being done by the Russians using artillery against civilian areas that are also being used by the Ukrainian military. If the Russians really wanted to level Kharkov or level Kiev, they could do that, and you would absolutely know the Russians are trying to level Kiev. They are not trying to level Kiev at this stage. We are not seeing that. Otherwise, you would definitely know the Russians are trying to level Kiev. They're still being somewhat restrained. They're missing, and they are hitting targets in cities. But they're not at this point with an overall objective, attempting to completely level cities. It's just not happening right now. You will see some of their, if they ever decide to do that, which I'm not sure they would. Is it possible? Of course. Obviously, then we would see bomb trucks going over the city and dropping an immense amount of ordnance. That's backfire bombers, possibly blackjack bombers, and bear bombers dropping their ordnance on top of built up areas. And again, not seeing that yet, that kind of destruction. We are seeing destruction, and I'm not going to sidestep that and say that's not occurring. But within the confines of this war and Russian doctrine, obviously we are seeing some fairly significant destruction of civilian areas, and that's very, very unfortunate. But we're not seeing the wholesale destruction by the Russians on an intent-based level in terms of trying to destroy Kiev. If they did that, you would absolutely know, and you would see what they were doing, because it would be much more catastrophic than some of the images that we're seeing now. But that's the situation. Just wanted to talk about that a little bit and clarify things a bit on that whole mine controversy issue, and talk about that for where you, the viewer, will have awareness on that subject. That's all I have for now. More to come soon. Have a good day, everybody.